economy tomorrow. Well, the Prime Minister acknowledged today that the economy was facing a severe blow from the impact of coronavirus. It's been another day of heavy losses on the world stock markets. London's FTSE 100 closed down 4%. There were even bigger falls in New York and Frankfurt and Paris and Madrid. Aviation firms are among those hardest hit. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, brings us up to date.
Across the UK, the eerie sight of airports turning into parking lots as planes are grounded, unused, as people stop flying across the Atlantic and within Europe as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Pilots, aircrew, ground staff, airlines forced to lay off workers, and in Virgin's case, temporarily imposing leave without pay for several weeks at least. Preventing shutdowns in aviation, car factories, most things from becoming permanent economic scars is top of the in tray of Andrew Bailey on his first day as new Governor of the Bank of England. He suggested more support on its way.
The damage that's done to the economy, and that's something that we want to minimise and stop. And that's why you saw prompt action last week. That's why you will see prompt action again when we need to take it. You can be assured, the public can be assured of that.
Indeed, his counterparts in the USA slashed interest rates by 1% last night, but markets across the world tumbled again, reaching their lowest levels for several years before recovering half the losses. These are massive moves in stock markets, and they're happening every single day. They reflect the fact that when parts of society shut down, sectors of the economy do too, from aviation to car production. And while right now the health emergency is obviously the priority, when companies run out of cash, they can't pay people, they have to lay workers off. And that is why huge amounts of government help, more than they possibly could imagine last week, will now be required.
300 milliards d'euros.
In France, President Macron took to the airwaves to pledge 300 billion euros to make sure no company goes bust because of the virus. That was after a G7 meeting of world leaders, but not in person, over video conference. Seeking a more coordinated response, the PM acknowledged the economic challenge.
It's perfectly obvious, just from the G7 conversation I was having today, everybody sees that this is going to be potentially a severe blow for the economy.
Many in business are choosing to muck in at this time of national crisis. Here, a gin distillery in Bristol making alcohol hand sanitizer, others helping manufacture vital NHS equipment. But pretty quickly, it will be businesses large and small that will need a massive flow of funding from somewhere. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, in France, as we saw there, President Macron has ordered tough restrictions on people's movement for at least 2 weeks to slow the spread of coronavirus, and said that the army would be drafted in to help move the sick to hospitals. The French authorities have already shut down restaurants and bars and closed schools and universities. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson is in Paris with the latest for us. Lucy?
Well, the restrictions here have been tightened day after day, but there was a real change in tone tonight. President Macron saying that everybody had to stay in their homes except for really core, really essential jobs like going to the shops for food, like accessing medical care. And even for those outings, there's going to be a form they have to print off and carry with them at all times. There's going to be 100,000 police officers to monitor those rules across the country, and fines for anyone who breaks them. President Macron also said that the EU borders, the Schengen borders of the European Union would be closed, also to try and stop the virus spreading. I think there's a real frustration in the government here that a lot of people in France are simply, or have been, simply carrying on as normal, flocking to restaurants, hanging out in parks. The Director General of Health here said this morning it was a very worrying situation. The situation was deteriorating very fast, and I think the government simply decided that something more dramatic had to be done.
Lucy, many thanks again for the latest there in Paris tonight. Lucy Williamson. Well, in Europe's worst affected country, which is Italy, the number of deaths has now passed 2,000, with nearly 28,000 cases in total. But experts say that the rate of new infections is falling after some extremely tough restrictions on movement in parts of Italy. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has been talking to those who've suffered losses as the virus continues to spread.
85-year-old Giuseppina Panzetti on holiday in the city of Genoa last month, just before the coronavirus took hold, killing her within days. We got through to her daughter, Miriam, stuck in an area under lockdown from where she was unable to reach her dying mother. Bans on funerals meant a quick burial. One story of more than 2,000 lives taken.
What hurts most is that I couldn't be there with her. It makes you feel powerless. It's devastating, surreal. People are falling like flies here. 6 people died the same day as my mother. Every day there are 4 or 5 more. In a war, you can see the enemy. With this, you can't. It's worse.
Italy's only maker of ventilators is now quadrupling production. Technicians from the army sent in to help, scrambling to keep Italians alive. Daniela De Rosa is a lucky one. She's pulling through with a warning.
Today I got my first negative result, so I breathe a slight sigh of relief because I'm winning this battle. If you don't go through this, you will never understand the pain and desperation. But still, not everyone gets it. Maybe out of ignorance or fear or thinking they're above it, they ignore the restrictions or the quarantine. But we each have to do our job.
Well, this is the second hospital in Rome that from today is being used to treat coronavirus patients, increasing the beds in this city dedicated to the outbreak to 1,000 as cases rise here. And this is far from the worst hit part of the country in the north, where intensive care units are almost at capacity. And in the north, this is the cost. 10 pages of obituaries. A month ago, it was 1. How fast this silent killer has brought Italy to its knees. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Rome.
Well, in Spain, the government has announced sweeping new measures, allowing it to take over private healthcare providers and seize medical equipment. The country has 9,500 recorded cases of coronavirus. Streets were largely deserted on the first working day of a lockdown after the government announced a state of emergency at the weekend. And in Washington, President Trump said that the coronavirus emergency could last until the end of the summer or even longer. The President said that over the next 15 days, Americans should not gather in groups of more than 10 people and should avoid restaurants. The US has so far had 4,100 cases of the virus, 71 deaths. Mr. Trump urged all elderly Americans to stay at home for their own safety. Our North America correspondent Nick Bryant has the latest.
We live in a world right now where so much looks familiar, but almost everything feels different. And on the Monday morning Staten Island ferry, these empty rows were a measure of community concern. These protective masks, a global badge of fear.
People are worried and we don't know what to do, and that makes us worry more.
I was just actually thinking this morning about how apocalyptic it felt. I was lying in bed and I was like, this is a movie. It can't be real.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Never seen it like this in my life. I've been living here all my life. Incredible.
On the New York subway system, social distancing would usually be impossible in the middle of the rush hour. But this morning it felt like a ghost train. This city of perpetual motion is shutting down. Its bars, its restaurants, its school system. And it's frightening for New Yorkers like Liz Santana.
Oh no, it's devastating what's happening right now. It's very emotional for a lot of service people to lose their jobs.
Times Square is normally the pulsing heart of Manhattan, bumper to bumper congested. But just about the only activity was on its dancing big screens. Images from a Chinese news channel with scenes that are now playing out here.
They call Times Square the crossroads of the world, but nobody wants to meet here anymore.
The nation's capital looked like a scene from some dystopian drama. And at the White House, the physical barriers that protect the president are now being augmented by medical checks on people going inside. And it's not just the health of the nation that's on Donald Trump's mind, but the economic fallout after another calamitous day on the markets.
Thank you.
Which took yet another hit after he'd answered this question.
Is the U.S. economy heading into a recession? Well, it may be. We're not thinking in terms of recession. We're thinking in terms of the virus. Once we stop, I think there's a tremendous pent-up demand, both in terms of the stock market and in terms of the economy. And once this goes away, once it goes through and we're done with it, I think you're going to see a tremendous surge.
U.S. airlines are seeking a $50 billion government bailout, given so much of the world has been immobilized. But one sector of the American economy is experiencing a dramatic spike in sales. The queue here in Los Angeles was for guns.